2025 has been one of the best years this decade for movies, with certified bangers coming out basically every month. But for every good movie, there have also been quite a lot of bad movies. Today, I'll be discussing the top 10 worst movies of 2025. This is just my opinion, so I'm going to be a little biased for this, like for most lists. But, anyways, let's dive straight into this. We have a lot of bad movies to talk about. At number 10, we have You're Cordially Invited. Most of you probably haven't heard of this film because this was a straight to Prime release that came out in January. And like most January releases, yeah, it was pretty bad. This film is basically about Will Ferrell and Reese Witherspoon as their kids are getting married and how somehow the place they rented to stay for the weekend was double booked and they have to share the place together as hijinks ensue. I don't think I have ever seen a Will Ferrell movie as unfunny as this. Will Ferrell and especially Reese Witherspoon are very talented actors, but there is nothing to be said about this screenplay. It is so dull and generic that there is very few jokes that make you laugh. The two worst type of movies, in my opinion, are a bad comedy movie and a bad horror movie, as those are two genres that heavily rely on those factors to hit. And yeah, I was barely laughing whatsoever. Probably every 30 minutes or so. There just wasn't anything funny, and there wasn't a single memorable scene or character. I basically don't remember a single thing about this movie, even though I've seen it less than a year ago. This is a very generic, straight to streaming slop, and shows why these movies no longer show up in theaters. Because the only way someone's gonna enjoy it is if they're just putting this on one night. So yeah, You're Cordially Invited, pretty bad movie. At number 9, we have The Alto Nights, directed by Barry Levinson, who won an Oscar for his direction for Rain Man and got nominated for other films like Bugsy as well, with Robert De Niro in a dual leading role. We've had quite a few dual leading roles in this past year, whether it comes to Sinners or Mickey 17. But the Alto Knights try so hard to be a classic Scorsese gangster film, and throughout the entire thing, it doesn't entertain you whatsoever. It's based off the true story of Frank Costello, but man, this movie tries so hard to be something like Goodfellas or The Departed or The Irishman, but fails at every single chance. Barry Levinson's decline in quality is quite interesting because you go from winning an Oscar for Best Director to releasing a movie like this. And yeah, this is genuinely one of the most boring films I watched this year. A lot of people say don't use the word boring as an adjective. There's more interesting words you can use. But I was just bored the entire thing. Not a single interesting thing happens. The screenplay isn't witty. The direction is pretty awful at times. And looks like something an amateur director could even do better. The moment I watched it, I forgot basically everything about it the moment it ended. The Alto Nights is a generic crime movie and is a movie you would see at a dollar store because it's genuinely that bad. Then at number 8, we have Happy Gilmore 2. Expectations weren't that high for this basically legacy sequel to Happy Gilmore, even though that first film is a pretty good comedy film. Adam Sandler's comedic work has just been on the decline for so long now, and he should just stick to his drama films. But Happy Gilmore 2 is not only a very disrespectful sequel to the original, the only thing entertaining about it is which celebrity is going to appear every few minutes. Not only do we kill Gilmore's love interest from the first film, not even 5 minutes into the movie, but it's just him being a depressing alcoholic, and suddenly he just has to become the best golf champion in the world once again. The only thing that makes this film memorable is the callbacks to the original film, all of which are pretty bad, and seeing which celebrity shows up every few minutes. There are, I think, 30 or 40 different celebrities from everything. You have comedians in this, dramatic actors, you have podcasters, people from the sports industry, And none of it makes sense. It all feels very forced and tacked on. And the only reason these people were doing this is for a paycheck. The story is just a worse version of the original film. And aside from all of those celebrity cameos, not a single entertaining thing happens other than that, other than those callbacks. And it leaves you with a very bitter taste by the end. The characters are not as likable as the original. The callbacks feel very cheap. And this is just one of Adam Sandler's weaker films. Granted, he does have some pretty atrocious movies, but this one is one of the worst ones in recent memory. Another straight to streaming movie as well. At number 7, we have Five Nights at Freddy's 2. I wasn't the biggest hater of the first one. It was a pretty mediocre film, but it had the potential to be very interesting. But the second movie somehow is even worse. The fact that this movie is PG 13 doesn't allow it to be as horrific as some parts of the games. But granted, children and teenagers, for the most part, are seeing this movie, so it's to be expected. There's nothing of substance in this movie. I have played the Five Nights at Freddy's games. I'm not the biggest fan of them, not my cup of tea personally. But the callbacks, again, just like Happy Gilmore 2, and the lore and references to the game is pretty forced on and doesn't do anything even remotely interesting to the first film. The screenplay is one of the worst ones of this whole year. Scott Cawthon, the creator of the game, he's a pretty bad writer in my books. And this film is just, on any standpoint, it is just so bad. The characters from the original don't have much to do and aren't fleshed out. The new characters are extremely unlikable, and you don't care whatsoever what happened to them. And the animatronics of Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, they're just whatever. This doesn't feel much like a horror movie, and this is for the fans. But the fans deserve a better movie than this. Just because there are references and Easter eggs to a game doesn't make it interesting or good. And overall, once I finished Five Nights at Freddy's 2, it just left like a really bad taste in my mouth and something I absolutely would not recommend to anyone. And if you have no interest in the games, this movie is going to be a much worse experience for you as well. At number 6, we have Ella McKay. From director James O. Brooks, co-creator of The Simpsons and director of Terms of Endearment, Broadcast News, and As Good as It Gets, man, this movie shows how out of touch he is. Ella McKay is another one of his comedy dramas, and after not directing a movie for nearly 15 years, granted, most people weren't expecting much, but even then, this story falls flat on its face. The main character of Ella McKay, she's just not the most likable character and is pretty obnoxious at times, even though lots of the other characters in the film are pretty bad as well. You have so many talented actors in this movie, like Jamie Lee Curtis, Woody Harrelson, and Albert Brooks, but your characters, for the most part, you don't connect with them or can relate to them. And even the characters you hate, you don't hate them for the reasons you're supposed to hate them. The characters are either ones that are supposed to be emotionally effective, like Ella McKay and her family, and some of the other side characters are even worse. They have one character quality, and yeah, that's it. You have so many talented people working on this film, but the movie is just so, first off, not funny, and on an emotional level, you just don't connect with it whatsoever. It's a shame what a once talented director is now delivering to us. But Elle McKay just doesn't do anything interesting and shows how these type of movies have been on the decline for the last decade and audiences just aren't that interested in these type of movies anymore. Next up at number 5, we have Flight Risk. Say what you will about Mel Gibson and all of his controversies in the past, but he is a pretty talented director. I think Braveheart's a genuinely great movie, and even though I wasn't the biggest fan of Hacksaw Ridge, his previous movie, he still had some talent. But going from Hacksaw Ridge to Flight Risk is one of the biggest drops in quality I have ever seen. Flight Risk is such a nothing movie, basically about a FBI agent who has to transport a convict from a plane to Alaska, but the pilot himself, played by Mark Wahlberg in one of his worst roles, has to stop them. And you're stuck on this plane for around 90 minutes or so, the whole length of the film. And unlike some movies that take place in one place, they try to make it more interesting and unique, changing like the camera angle. Nothing of worth happens in this movie. The acting is pretty mediocre, but Mark Wahlberg, especially with his baldy cap, is just so cringe. I don't use that word often, but it's just painstakingly cringe and is just so uninteresting. And like, how did Mel Gibson go from creating like such great and interesting movies to such a boring and bland film like this? This was a very anticipated screenplay, but the execution and direction is just so painfully atrocious. It just hurts to watch. A 90-minute movie should go by pretty fast, but this one was especially super slow and mind numbing, and nothing of worth happens in this movie, then the only interesting thing is when Mark Wahlberg's character gets killed. That probably brings it up by half a star, but nothing else can help this mediocre movie stand out. And I wonder how Mel Gibson, even with his controversies and everything, could direct such a bad movie like this. At number 4, we have a 90-minute movie that somehow feels even longer, that being Love Hurts. A lot of action movies have been desperately trying to chase the greatness of being a John Wick movie, and most of them fail. And unfortunately, even though I was anticipating Love Hurts, it falls into those traps as well. It follows Ke Huy Quan, Oscar winner Ke Huy Quan, as a real estate agent who has to be brought back into a life of crime. And even though this film doesn't even crack the 90-minute mark, nothing of worth happens in this. The film has like 3 or 4 locations, each of them being extremely generic. And aside from Kwan's character, all of these characters are so one dimensional that you don't care about them. Sean Astin plays a major part in this film, and even though you're supposed to care about him, he doesn't even have like 10 minutes of screen time. So his death that comes has no emotional impact either way. And Ariana DeBose, man, she has had one of the worst post Oscar careers in a minute, and she does not do anything interesting whatsoever as the love interest for Kwan. And the fight scenes are alright, but either way, the story, the plot, and the villain himself is just, oh my god, so boring. Like, I genuinely was thinking of turning this movie off half an hour in, but I went through the whole entire thing. And this went from a movie I was excited for to a movie that I really regretted watching. Love Hurts is unfortunately another extremely generic action movie. And even though you have Ki Hui Kwan in it, it doesn't make up for much. Number 3, we have Snow White. We as a society are pretty exhausted from all of these Disney live action remakes, even if there is a decent one or a mediocre one from time to time. But I don't think we have had a live action remake as bad as Snow White. Based on the very first Disney film, this film does not do a single thing that puts it apart from the animated remake. Gal Gadot delivers perhaps the worst female performance I've seen this year. She is genuinely one of the worst actors in recent memory, and I do not know how she is getting work. And nothing else helps make up for the fact. The story itself is a worse version of the original. The songs are pretty bad. The CGI dwarfs are just so creepy and repulsive that just looking at them is just makes you feel like disgust. And Rachel Zegler is fine. She is the best part of the movie, which isn't saying much considering how bad this is. The movie looks extremely ugly, and there's no interesting color palettes whatsoever to help it stand out. And it's just a bad movie. This is one of the lowest rated movies like of all time with a wide release on like IMDb. and it deserves that rating because this movie is genuinely that bad. It is such a disgrace to the original movie. It deserves a flop. Unfortunately, I don't think live action remakes from Disney are going to stop anytime soon. Lilo and Stitch was such a big success, and we have the live action Moana coming out next year. So yeah, even though Snow White was a massive flop on every front, this trend unfortunately is not going to finish. At number two, we have Hurry Up Tomorrow, based off of The Weeknd's final album of the same name. Album movies are not the best type of movies, even if the songs are extraordinary, like on Purple Rain. It's tough to make a good story and characters with that. And Hurry Up Tomorrow is a prime example of why these movies aren't made anymore. The Weeknd is another one of the worst actors I have ever seen. This is one of, if not the worst performance by him. The Weeknd overacts so much and he tries so hard to be a dramatic actor, and he fails on every front. And Jenna Ortega and Barry Keoghan deliver maybe their worst performances in this movie as well. There's not much going for this film, but aside from the occasional good song from the album, the movie just drags on and doesn't do a single thing interesting. The story is somehow very convoluted, but very basic as well. Nothing of worth happens in this story, and you get very confused by what happens to it because everything just moves so fast, but it just doesn't stick in your memory throughout. The direction's bad, the screenplay's bad, and on a technical aspect, this is some of the worst stuff I've seen this year. But The Weeknd's performance really brings this down as well. Hurry Up Tomorrow is one of the worst movies I think I've ever seen. But somehow, there is one movie that surpasses it entirely. Before we get to my number one worst movie of the year, here are some very dishonorable mentions. A Working Man, one of the blandest action movies I've seen. You have seen some part of this movie before. Jason Statham plays a very generic character, and David Ayer has proven himself to be one of the worst directors working as of now. A Working Man has nothing interesting when it comes to character wise, and aside from some decent action stuff that happens from time to time, it's one of the most forgettable films of the year. Him, produced by Jordan Peele, this sports horror movie was really fascinating to see, and it was really hyped as well. But just because he was a producer doesn't mean this movie is good. Whether it comes to the sports aspects or the horror aspects of this film, him fails on every single portion and delivers a very nothing movie. There are some good scenes in the movie, especially at the end, and Marlon Wayans delivers a pretty decent performance. But this film was so interesting just for it to fail miserably at basically everything it had to do. The Electric Shade, the Russo's Brothers movie for Netflix, is one of the most expensive movies of all time. And the entire time, you do not see anywhere where the budget goes. Based on a very interesting novel, the Electric State film is just slop. It is pretty bad at basically every front. Even the CGI and special effects, while they do look solid, just does not excuse this very poor screenplay and story. A very generic sci fi apocalypse screenplay, and something we've all seen before. And for such an expensive movie, I have no clue where this budget went, and makes me very nervous with what the Russo brothers had to bring with Avengers Doomsday. And lastly, a Minecraft movie. Expectations weren't high, and this movie was one of the most whatever movies I've seen. Aside from having a lot of meme worthy stuff that was on like Instagram Reels and TikTok for months, there's nothing memorable about this. Jack Black, Jason Momoa, and the rest of the cast are fine, but this story just leaves you with nothing. This is just a movie you could watch unmuted and you would have the same impact. But now, the number one worst movie of 2025. I think a lot of you were expecting this movie, as it's one of the worst rated movies of all time. We have the 2025 version of War of the Worlds. I rarely give a movie a half star, because a half star movie, in my books, has to fail on every single aspect. Nothing redeeming whatsoever. And World of the Worlds is that type of movie. Whatever clips you've seen of it, it is even worse. Led by Ice Cube in the classic adaptation of this story, not only is the acting bad, the direction, screenplay, story, the themes of the movie, and the special effects just fail on every single aspect. This feels like a promotion for Amazon Prime more than a warning of what the future holds for us. The acting by the entire cast is the worst I've seen this year. They stutter and they sound very robotic, like they are just reading from some sort of script they got a couple minutes ago. And the special effects are atrocious as well. The story makes no sense. There are like a few central characters, and all of them just save the world magically from these robot aliens. And even when they show up, the way this is presented as a Zoom meeting just makes the movie so much worse as a result. Ice Cube is pretty bad with the rest of the cast. And yeah, if you just want to watch one of the worst movies of all time, War of the Worlds is that story for you. An extremely disgraceful adaptation of this story. It was filmed 5 years ago, but it was just released this year for some reason, and it should have been shelved. I don't think movies should be shelved and they should be released, but this is one of the few rare movies where its release hurts the film landscape as a whole and feels like AI made this entire movie. But, anyways, I hope you all enjoyed this list of my top 10 worst movies of 2025. In the comments, leave me some movies you thought were terrible that I didn't mention, or elaborate a little more about why the movies I chose were bad as well. Thank you all so much for watching, and be sure to stay tuned for my top 10 best movies of 2025 as well.